So we're right at one now. Oh, we just added one more, up to 21 participants, but we seem to have kind of reached a plateau. So I'll kick things off. Um, good early afternoon, everyone. My name is Henry Underwood. I'm a planner at Southwest Region Planning Commission. For those of you who don't know me, you are muted right now, but I'll give you some chances to unmute yourselves or raise your hands in a little bit. This is, let's see, the second meeting of the year of the Monadnock Broadband Group, and we got a pretty packed agenda, and I'm also trying to keep our meeting shorter than normal. So this is gonna be tough, but we're gonna do our best. So a couple of quick housekeeping items for communicating with us non-verbally. You can use the participants option at the upper middle part of your screen to open up a kind of list of attendees. At the bottom, you've got an option to raise your hand. And use that to let us know you're ready to talk or you want to add something to an item. If you are joining by phone, same thing applies. We'll do our best to unmute people who have raised your hands, but those are the keys you can use if you're just called in by phone to unmute yourself, to raise your hand, to add something. So as I said, a pretty packed agenda, and we're gonna do our best to get through it within 90 minutes here. So for the welcome introductions, we obviously can't do this in person. Wanted to give you the moment to introduce yourself via the chat, the Zoom group chat. I'm also going to, show this kind of, I think, a timely Twitter post I noticed on Friday. The road is our internet now. That's kind of where we are. But I also want to try out a poll function of this meeting to learn a little bit about you and show those results. So those should be showing on your screen, and I'll leave that open for a little bit while I tell you about our last meeting, what you may have missed. We heard about both state and federal legislation relative to broadband. Bills that were just introduced this session. I'll tell you about where to locate those, and we'll go into a little more detail. We learned a lot from Carol Monroe about ValleyNet and EC Fiber. We're also joined by a representative of Lyme Fiber of Lyme, New Hampshire, to hear about their efforts to improve broadband in the Upper Valley. So looks like there's still some poll results coming in. This is kind of just the test, but please, if you can, take a moment to go through the 3 questions in that poll. And thank you to everyone chiming in to say hello in the group chat. And for now, I'll just close the polling, hopefully share those results with you. Okay, so lots of representation from local municipal government of the people who participated. A number of new attendees, that's great. And I threw out just a partial list of issues people have seen relative to enhancing broadband, and some of those you can see there. Great, so that was a massive success. Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 2, which is legislative updates. And there were at least, I believe 3 bills this legislative session at the state level. There were a number that we heard about at the federal level from Bobby Graham last time. And I'll just give a brief overview of what I've heard on the status of these bills, and then I'll invite Senator Deach, Senator Khan, if they're attending, to add to that, and then turn to any federal delegation staff to update us on the federal side of things. So again, you can read about these bills, find the text, find the status of the Senate committee hearings and other things on our webpage. It's linked there. And these state bills were heard last month by a Senate committee. They were, my understanding is the Senate Bill 457 was given an ought to pass vote. And my other understanding is bills 459 and 559, which do kind of overlap each other and speak to broadband bonding, are going to be reconciled in some way. So that's the short update I have on those bills, and that's where you can read a little bit more. I'll just find the unmute button here and invite Senator Deach or Senator Khan to add to that. Let us know where these are. Let's see. All right, so we can come back to, I'm not seeing Senator Khan in the attendee list right now, although we have a couple of just phone numbers, and invite Senator Deach to comment later. How about federal delegation staffers, Michelle Cota, Bobby Graham, Tom Giancola, if you could raise your hand and be unmuted. Let's see, so Michelle, I found you first and unmuted you. Is there something you'd like to add to this item?
I guess a couple of things that I could add. There was some updates. I know there was a delegation letter calling for additional E-rate funds to be released, which should help with hopefully some fast infrastructure for our schools to connect students in the last mile. And I know I've seen some creative use of buses as hotspots around in Rochester and other places. So, but we're hoping to get some of those federal dollars to release so we can do some fast upgrades. And also the Lifeline program for those with lower incomes, that assistance program. There was also a call to increase the amount of data and enable the hotspots to be used for actual work, like on laptops and that type of streaming. So that was another program to help with remote access for working remote, and also for education and getting households connected. So those are a couple things that have been happening in the last week or two. So I can make sure to keep you updated on anything that solidifies from that.
Thanks for those updates, Michelle. And I know for a couple of those items, there were some news articles that I captured under the news section of our webpage if you wanted to read more about those items. I'm not seeing Bobby Graham from Senator Hassan's office or Tom Giancola on from Annie Custer's office. So let's, maybe I'll turn it over and give the option to Senator Khan or Senator Deach to mention anything about the New Hampshire bills.
You go ahead, Jay.
Well, the first bill is yours, which is a great bill on communication districts.
Okay. I've got too many windows open here. I'm going to try to find my video. There we go.
All right.
Okay. So you should be able to see me now. The 457 actually was not voted on in committee. It got a suggestion that we an ought to pass motion, and it seemed like it was going to be unanimous, but the chair of the committee wasn't there, so they didn't actually vote.
Okay.
So it's looking good. And I have talked with both Senator Shaheen's and Congressman Custer's folks about it. In particular, Sam from Congresswoman Custer's office is particularly interested in this because Congresswoman Custer is putting together a funding bill for broadband. And what I talked to her about, or him, Sam, about, was the importance of, if they are going to talk about who receives the monies, you know, if the bill just gives the money to the state, that's one thing. But if the bill is actually going to specify what sort of entities can receive it, then I wanted to make sure that communications districts were part of that bill.
Mm-hmm.
And then in addition, of course, I was just checking to make sure the 25.3 was a threshold. And also I suggested that if possible, they just state outright that copper is not an option for building out. And then I tried to explain to them what your bill, Jay, is doing, which you can talk about in a minute. And I tried to say that they might want to include that also in the bill, as far as defining what unserved means if they're going to be talking about unserved. So I would say anybody who does have things that they want to be covered should be talking to Congresswoman Custer's group, and the fellow in charge of that, his name is Sam.
Thank you, Senator Deitch, for the clarification and for the word on the federal legislation. Could you say anything about like what the next step is for 457, like when it might be heard again, for example?
Well, we are talking about having committees be able to meet through Zoom meetings, though the fact that the meetings have been bombed by hackers kind of threw a monkey wrench into the idea of having public meetings. So the Senate and the House Rules Committees are working together, trying to figure out how we can start meeting again, at least for the hearings. But to my knowledge, they have not yet come up with a solution for that. But hopefully, we're at least trying to get them to set a deadline for it, which is, is the first step, right? And hopefully that will be in early May.
Okay.
There's no real word about that.
Okay, thank you. Senator Khan, were you ready to say something about 459 or 559?
I can do that. I'll follow up first with where Senator Deitch just finished off. The Joint Legislative Fiscal Committee will hold a hearing this Friday. That committee is responsible for advice and consent on the receipt of any funds that adjust the budget that was approved for the 2021 fiscal years. So yes, slowly, the legislature is gathering its feet underneath it. And well, I mean, I think Jean and I have been extraordinarily busy in these couple of weeks, much like everybody else, gathering information and being able to use it quickly takes a lot of swimming upstream. So now these two bills, they are very comparable to each other. One is the 459 bill is proposed by Senator Bradley, a Republican from the Lakes region, Conway, and the other by me. And we had good testimony from Brad Roscoe and John Snowden at the committee, and that was welcome. What it's trying to do is, as Gene alluded, it's trying to define what an underserved community is, and how through the bid process, any existing provider has to participate in that bid process, or they negate their claim to having a served area. Now, that served area might be by some other, for instance, the cable company may not respond, but the phone company might, and their overlapping areas might be 100%. So it may not make any difference, but there are some smaller companies as well that are not responding to the RFPs. It's really leaving municipalities and towns in an awkward position of, do they deny service to their customers, or they deny the right to a served area by the provider. So this is trying to sort that out so that everybody gets served. When it comes to federal legislation, I'm glad to hear that Congresswoman Custer's interested. I think we should all pool some ideas. I'm going to call, as I know I've done before, but if it's hot now, I'll do it again. I mean, these standards that we go to as an underserved community, they were set in 2014. And a lot of ground has been covered by broadband capabilities since then. So we need to be aggressive and take a look at FCC guidelines and other barriers that there are to more thorough and better standards for the entire industry.
So if I can cut in here, Jay, isn't it true? I thought when Senator Shaheen's office briefed us on the CARES Act, I thought when I asked about broadband, they said that the 100 million nationally available for that is going to 25-3.
Yes.
And
yeah, that's right. The federal Reconnect program.
The federal Reconnect. Well, so the 25-3, that if a telephone company is offering service, they would not qualify by definition. Is that not true? So even if the cable company says we're not interested in covering this, it doesn't matter what the telephone company has unless they have some fiber or something else, right?
There are a lot of boosters going in around, but I think your point is a DSL line would not qualify, and I think that's
my point. Yeah. And so I guess I'm just always scared that the phone company is going to be saying that it does.
Yeah, we just it's possible, but Consolidated Communications has just done such a great job stepping up. And by the way, if anybody knows of a household that does not have broadband access, but they do have a phone line, they should be contacting Consolidated Communications that will install or provide 2 months free service through the end of the school year to any household that has a kid, school-age kid.
Great. Thank you both for the updates on those. And I assume, the timing would be similar for 459 and 559, that might be May before these are back on calendars.
We've got an amendment on that combines 459, 559. Everyone signed off on it. We're good.
Okay.
But yeah, we won't be. We need a calendar update because it'd be very hard to complete the session by June. Our date was June 4th. It could be extended to June 29th. It could be extended into the fall. Anyway, a lot more to follow. Thanks, Henry. I'll mute myself.
Thank you both. So there is one question from, let me see if I can make unmute you, Rebecca.
Yeah, you did.
Great.
So I have some experience both with the city and the town in New Hampshire. I like what's going on in terms of Consolidated, for example, being able to use the bonding process to build out a fiber network for the whole town. That's fantastic. Keene is still up the creek. We have streets with no broadband. Consolidated is not providing free broadband for 2 months because those streets have copper, old rotten copper, and they can't bring broadband where there is no good infrastructure to bring it. So those 4 or 5 streets would be so happy to have broadband right now. They have college students who are home but living elsewhere because they're not able to do their online classes. They have kids in elementary school and high school who are not able to do their online learning. They have people who are home working and they can't work from home and they have nowhere to go. So it's been a big problem. It's great that that particular bonding bill is working for towns. But I have probably 50 residents or so who are really discouraged and calling me regularly. And we can't do anything to help them. I have heard from Y Valley that Y Valley is not interested in this case because they are able to get projects that they're getting paid for down in Massachusetts, where the state is supporting those projects and they're not able to get the return on their investment up here. I do also look forward to working with, as many people are interested in solving the problem with communities that do have 25 meg, but that businesses are still paying 4 to 5 times what they would be over the border. Thank you.
Rebecca, let's continue to talk with each other. Let's do that soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the addition, Rebecca. And yeah, these bills that we were following as maybe we saw them as potential shorter term fixes, all of a sudden we have to think about a lot of other short-term needs that are coming up. I didn't respond to this correctly to a question from someone asking on how to raise your hand. For folks, just as a refresher, go to the upper bar of your screen. It kind of pulls down and you can choose the participants list to open up the list of all attendees to chat with them. I believe at the bottom is a raise hand feature. Please someone correct me on that in the chat if that is not right. The last thing I wanted to cover before moving on from this item is what we didn't really get to last time, and that is the potentially doing some coordinated testimony to the committees, the full House, the full Senate on these 3, or I guess what is going to be 2 bills. I wanted to ask if that is of interest to the group. And if so, we kind of need to enter a brief brainstorming session. So if people could maybe indicate that developing some type of Monadnock Broadband Group coordinated letter that outlining maybe the key bullets to each of these items, would be prepared to the committees or full House, full Senate would be of interest. Please raise your hand. You can say yes in the participants chat. You could write in in the chat box if you'd like to talk about that. So I'm seeing a couple of yeses. So, and why staff are kind of mentioning this is and Jay alluded to this, that testimony received during the process is beneficial. And we're in a kind of position to compile information from this group that could be in such a letter. I'm going to acknowledge Tim for a moment here to comment on that. Doesn't look like it's working. Ooh, there we go. Tim, did you have a comment? I saw you raising your hand. Okay. Audio doesn't seem to be coming through, so we'll try to pick that up later. So we saw some yeses, some potential interests. So what would be helpful in this meeting is to start to compile some of the key points that the Monadnock Broadband Group might want to include in such a letter. You know, statements of fact, statements of need that are aligned to these proposed laws. And it would be very helpful to hear what some of those points our region could put forth. Do folks have some suggestions for topics or ideas that could be in that letter?
So this is Carol Monroe. One of the things that would be helpful is there are a number of towns in the Cheshire County area that have moved forward with an individual solution for their town. But there are other towns that are looking for a solution. And there are some really small towns that have not really moved forward. And so I would be interested in hearing from those very small towns as to whether, if they had the opportunity to be part of a district, would that help that momentum in moving them forward to getting broadband? And the committee, I think, in Concord, it would be helpful to hear from those small towns. I mean, that's what this is all about.
That's a great point, and there are a number of those small towns participating here today. So if you have some thoughts, please enter those in the chat or raise your hand to be unmuted.
Hi, Henry. This is Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Hi. I wanted to jump in on that point about hearing from smaller communities and their interest in, you know, collaborative approaches to broadband deployment, like communications districts. I just wanted to share with the group that the Planning Commission is conducting a regional broadband survey at the moment, and one of the questions is targeting this idea of potential interest in a communications district or other, you know, coordinated approaches to broadband. And you know, some folks on the call have responded. We've heard at this point mostly from towns that are more active, and we're planning some follow-up work on reaching out specifically to towns that haven't been as active in this group. And it's a bit of an unknown, you know, where they're at in terms of working on broadband issues. So I'm posting in the chat right now the link to that survey. So like I said, we'll be doing our own follow-up work, but if anyone on this call can help get the word out, especially to folks in smaller towns who haven't historically been as active in this group, that'd be appreciated. And I'm going to post my email in the chat in case anyone has questions about that survey. So thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Todd, for bringing that up. So we started to talk about maybe one of those key themes or bullets. Maybe a question to go back to Senator Deach and Senator Khan. Do you feel some testimony would be beneficial? And assuming yes, or if yes, what would be the deadline or that would be need to be completed by?
I would say that testimony would be helpful. I think at this point, a letter is probably as good as anything, and I would target the committee, which is election and municipal affairs, election law and municipal affairs. So if you go to the Senate website, and I'll put that in here, you'll find the 5 members of the committee and the clerk for the committee, and I think that would be just, and it doesn't have to be real long. Just needs to say, look, we support Senate Bill 559, which is going to be the bill that goes forward of the 2. We support Senate Bill 457. We believe both of these will serve underserved communities well. Use Carol's point about the small towns in particular served by 457 and the ability to merge their interests with other small towns or larger ones. So I think that would be good. And Jean left her note there about when it comes around the bend to the House, then I think personal appearance would be a value. And my guess is they'll both go to the same committee and they'll both be heard, on the same day again. And anyway, I think that it would be good to have a couple of people, whether it's Southwest Regional speaking on behalf of a bunch of towns, but it's always great to know that the people chairing the committees in towns are present. That it's powerful. So just a couple of reflections there. I think I had one more point, but I'll mute now.
Okay, so
Henry, here's the other point.
yeah.
So that's what to do with these bills. Keep in mind, the time between now and the 2021 legislative session isn't that long. So do be thinking about how far you want to move the goalposts in the near future, the next year. Because I think that'll be helpful. There's going to be a net a net metering bill study committee that bill will likely passed out of the Senate already, and so there are things that will be coming. Think to the future. Mm-hmm. And then work our way back to how can we do some things now.
Okay.
And in that respect, I agree with everything that Jay said. As far as thinking toward the future, and this may not require legislation, but I think this group should be thinking about how can we bring access to every, at least high school student, and how that might be done through the schools or whatever. And if we could talk sometime in the future about how we might be able to make that happen, that could be very significant.
Okay. So I'm kind of hearing two things that I think the Planning Commission could help to coordinate on. One is taking a lot of content from the chat in this conversation and maybe making up what that draft letter looks like to the committees, and circulating that with the group before it goes anywhere. The other thing I was hearing is it's not too early to think about other ideas for the next session, legislative service requests. So would always invite people who have those ideas to contact you directly, of course, or contact me to get referred to either of you. Let's kind of keep things moving here and move on to the next agenda item. We'll address any lingering comments in the chat. Try to do that afterwards. This year's town meeting results, which you can see here, are related to towns passing broadband bonding related warrant articles. And all 5 were to enter into these public-private partnerships with Consolidated to build out fiber to the home networks. and all 5 were successful. I couldn't find the vote on Walpole, but what I found is that all towns really had overwhelming success with these. And someone from, I'm going to unmute Peggy here to comment. Peggy Shear from Walpole, can you?
Sorry. Passed 133 to 2.
133 to 2 for Walpole.
We
Okay.
had a record turnout that day.
Very close to the Harrisville's record. So what I wanted to just say is, like, wow, congratulations to all of the people that worked hard to make this happen at their various town meetings. I wanted to invite folks from each town to say a couple of words, a minute or two, if they wanted to talk about, what they thought made their recipe successful, things they may have wanted to change, or, things that could be advice to other towns undertaking this in 2020. And I'll just look through the list for hands up. John from Westmoreland.
We had a very successful record turnout, supposedly the highest in over 50 years. What we found really worked for us is the fact that we had 0 questions. And the reason for that was because of how much attention we spent to the Facebook page, to different ways to keep the town absolutely in tune with exactly what we were doing. There never was a point in time where people weren't sure. So when it came time to do the vote, we anticipated questions. CCI was there with us. We had already cleared with the moderator that they would be allowed to speak. When I asked for if there were any questions, you could hear crickets. Not one person had a question. So we just turned right around and voted. And it was all due to the attention we spent to making sure people knew what was going on.
Thanks, John, for mentioning that communication as being part of your success. And, things like having a dedicated web page, I know was part of that, part of the tools that the town used.
We had a web page, plus we also left printed copies of the page at the town hall, at the library, at the town store, and then knowing that we had some folks that weren't quite as positive about this at the town store, we went and paid a visit. Mm-hmm. And it worked very well. By the time we worked out, or walked out, I should say, everybody except one person was on board.
Well, we're glad you got those in-person visits in advance of our current situation. So I'll next, Carol Monroe from Dublin. Would you like to say a couple things about Dublin's work?
Sure. I mean, I agree that communication was really important, and we have the ability in Dublin to have a monthly newsletter that goes out to everyone. We included an insert in that. And that really reached the bulk of the majority of the people. We also had a record turnout at town meeting, completely floored the moderator, didn't quite know how to handle it initially, but it was very successful. We had a couple of questions that came up at town meeting, but not questions we hadn't heard at the 3 information sessions we held ahead of time to make sure that everybody was on board. I really think, though, the answer to the question is because there is no tax implications unless there's a failure of the public partner. But there are no tax implications, that the bond is payable with access fees by those that use the service. I think those 2 points really made everyone on board, even those that wouldn't normally have wanted or needed additional internet. That was very important. So we're on to filling out the bond paperwork now and working through hopefully the final copies of the agreement with CCI.
Great. Thanks for the update, Carol. Let's see. Tim Wessels from town of Ringe.
Oh, hi, Henry. I serve on the Teltech committee in Ringe, and we approach the dissemination of information on the broadband improvement bond in a number of ways. We have monthly committee meetings, and the residents in town are invited to attend any of the meetings where we discussed it and our current status. We also had a special public presentation at one of our committee meetings in October to explain the process the town was engaging in. The select board was very helpful and very supportive for all the committee's efforts. We had really no questions. Ringe is an SB2 town, so there was a deliberative session on February 1st, I believe, and there actually were no questions about the warrant Article 2 for the bond. We also had 2 bond hearing meetings, and those were very straightforward. No issues there. We also had visibility 2 weeks before the vote on 2 successive Saturdays at the town transfer station. One of our broadband friends in town made signs so that we could stand there with the other candidates promoting a yes vote on Article 2, Fiber for All in Ringe. We had our committee chair wrote a letter to the editor, which I know was published in the Sentinel. I don't know about the Ledger transcript. We maintained a presence on both Facebook pages having to do with Ringe. One is Holly Koski's Life in Ringe, and the other is Marianne Harper's page, Ringe Reporter. So we were there to quash rumors and provide accurate information. We were in close contact with Rob Kester at CCI once they were selected, or once the Board of Selectmen accepted the recommendation of the Teltech committee to pick the CCI proposal. All in all, we had a really great response. As you can see in the numbers, Ringe is the largest town in this group, and we're very excited that all the other 4 towns also approved. And you can never underestimate the appeal of something that doesn't increase anyone's property taxes, and the users of the service will repay the bond principal and interest. Thank you.
Thanks for the great summary, Tim. Well, there's a lot of common threads there in communication and outreach. And there were a couple of questions in the chat. One is differences between regular town meeting towns and SB2 towns. I'm not sure which of each community each belongs to. Tim mentioned Ringe is an SB2 town, but if you are a representative of those communities, I'm sure they'd appreciate a response in the chat. There's also a question about how the cost for municipal bond counsel gets covered. If folks could chime in on that, greatly appreciated. Let's keep our agenda moving along here, and to more of a presentation or informational part of the agenda. In the past, we've had guests tell us about specific examples of how communities or regions or states have worked to improve broadband. And in my travels, I have connected with 2 other voices I was trying to bring into this, but not sure when. related to conversations in the state around digital equity. And I'm really pleased to have two folks from Mission Broadband join us to share some other examples from the Northeast about broadband improvement. John Dougherty is Vice President and General Manager of Mission Broadband. He has 30 years of experience in telecom, internet, and networking. Before Mission Broadband, John owned a consulting and project management company working on network solutions, things like that. And I guess probably up to very engrossed in the technologies that we think of as what gives us better internet and better broadband. Also happy to introduce Michael Reed, and thanks to both of them for joining us on video. Michael has over 40 years in the telecom industry, working in the Northeast, including with Consolidated. His experience includes network operations, outside plant operations, large project management, community and public relations, and regulatory and legislative affairs. So I'd like to once again welcome Mike and John, and I will advance your slides when you need them to be. Thanks for joining us.
Can you hear me, Henry?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Reed, and some people I already know and work with regularly. Others I've talked to on the phone. You can jump to the next slide, Matt, please. One thing I wanted to start off with, and it's already, we've already discussed it in a way. One thing that we're all learning, a very hard lesson, is how much we really need broadband. As soon as this, the virus hit and we started social distancing, our small group set out to create a survey. We've all taken surveys before about broadband, and you described one, a regional one, that I'd be very interested in finding out the results. But we haven't done a survey under these conditions. And we've heard everyone talking about, the college students now working from home, kids are working from home, adults working from home. Maybe one of the best anecdotes I heard was from a fellow in Maine that I know. He says, my 3-year-old had a meltdown because her video wouldn't run. So he needs higher bandwidth for his 3. I suspect that will be a commercial that we'll see sometime in the future. But we created this survey. It's a very simple survey. It's pretty much, do you have broadband or don't you? Do you have school-age children at home? What are you using it for? If you don't have broadband, what are you using for access? Many people, that's the only way we have to communicate right now. So we've offered it. This is a volunteer effort. We're offering it to all the states. We've offered it to some of our clients and other groups that we're working with. For the state of Maine, we have the state involved, and then there are several communities that decided to take a look at their own community, and we were able to accommodate that. I'm working with Carol Miller right now at the Economic Development Group, and we're trying to get a coordinated effort out for New Hampshire. This is a gentle request to see if you folks would like to participate from your group there, Henry, or anyone else. I mean, it's a matter of putting the link up on a website, and the more data, the better is what it boils down to. But Carol sent me a whole page full of acronyms here that she's been temporarily reassigned from her regular job, but once we get the go ahead from the commissioner in New Hampshire, we'll be doing New Hampshire Municipal Association, the Department of Economic Development, UNH, UNHSCI, and I'll think of it in a minute, New Hampshire student. That somebody can help me. But Carol's got several groups coordinated, and our position is the more data, the better. It's one of our clients in Maine here. It's a small town right near where I live, and they put it out. I think they attached it to the website last week, and they had well over 10% responses already from the town. So that's something, as soon as I get the word from Carol Henry, we'll put the information out for you folks if you'd be willing to participate and help us gather data. The data will come back to you. You know, we'll make all the data available. It's the goal of this is to help us get a better handle on what we need and how badly we need it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can take any questions on that if you have any. One thing I did want to mention, if I have time, is just a bit on the federal legislation. And I know Michelle and I had a conversation about this at a meeting in New Hampshire, but Mission Broadband has been very active in DC trying to create legislation to help get funding to the states, but actually trying to influence some of the legislation that's there. We tried pretty hard on the phase 3 of the America Cares, but that was designed for immediate action. If something could be done immediately, it went into phase 3, and we're hoping right now we're working to try to get some legislation into phase 4 if phase 4 comes. And it was very much in line with what we were talking about on state legislature of getting money directed to the states. Not all reverse auction, not in place of reverse auction, but in concert with reverse auction to give localities some power. Next slide, Henry, please.
Yeah. And Mike, just to mention, you know, I think everyone on the call realizes understanding broadband and mapping it, evaluating it is a continual process. So please, you know, share the information about the survey with me. I think many of us are in a position to help get the word out potentially.
One thing I can tell you, anecdotally, we've probably have 12, what is it, John? 1,250 responses.
Correct.
And I think one thing that has become abundantly clear from the responses we've seen is a lot of people have broadband, but it's proven inadequate for what their needs are with all the demands that we have on. I don't think anyone in this group is going to be surprised at that, but we really haven't put the test as we have been in the last 3 weeks. So I hate to say we're trying to find something positive out of this crisis, but the positive thing is we may be able to get some really good hard data that will help our state and federal legislation search for more dollars for us. The only thing I'll mention before I turn it over to John is one thing we've already heard, but every community, every group is unique. They come at it from a different perspective. Some is purely economic development. Some is need, like we just discussed. And the solutions are actually ending out to be almost as unique. So we go from everywhere from seeing people, some towns, they no other option, but they're going to build their own. That's the direction they're going, and that's what they've decided. Others, much like Chesterfield, Walpole, excuse me, Dublin, partnering, private-public partnership. So, and there are others in the middle there. So I'm going to turn over to John Dougherty, our Vice President and General Manager, and he can take you through some of what we have. And Maine has a real mixture of all those things I just mentioned.
That's true. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so this is just a kind of a slide I had thrown together a while ago that really shows the difference, right? You got Main Street and then you have not Main Street. So you go ahead, Henry. So you mentioned the models. I think different variations of them. Between a public-private true partnership, you got municipally owned but contracted out, which is kind of a public-private as well. You've got municipal owned and operated, which is a little bit harder, but a lot more to it. Yeah, I'll go ahead and advance. So we threw a couple of just quick videos up. It sounds like everybody on the phone has been through these before, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but just showing, how municipals can own and operate a network. It's a lot of cases it's open network. You want multiple ISPs. You want to be able to come in. There's software, certainly being developed nowadays that are, hopefully you can choose your ISP per night, right? If you've got good credit, you can go online and say, I want a different ISP tonight. So go ahead and advance. And then the public-private, right? There's a variety of ways that goes, but similar, ideas. Just you said fiber on the poles, copper on the poles. Yeah. How do you get good bandwidth to the end user? Go ahead and advance. And can you hear me all right, Henry?
Your line's a little scratchy, actually, John.
Okay. See if I can get.
I'm hearing what you're saying though, but it is a little scratchy.
Okay. Maybe I need better broadband.
Everyone's testing their upload speeds these
days. Yes, we are. I was just on the radio last week talking about that. In Maine specifically, and I'll let Mike talk a couple of the other states. So we certainly have municipally owned and contracted networks where they have gone down the road, where looked at a variety of things, put out RFIs, RFPs, and said, okay, we've got some costs now. Here's what we want to do, right? So that starts back with feasibility studies. We have a variety of people in, I think, all 3 states, right, trying to figure that piece of it out and what makes sense. You guys are a large group with certainly county combined efforts. We have those as well. Different towns. Sometimes it's not as easy to put multiple towns together, but single communities, multiple communities, it's nicer on the multiple communities when you start looking at some federal grants. They like that better, but it's just not as easy to pull together. In Maine, we have a group, if you're not familiar with it, called Connect Maine. So Connect Maine is funded through the state. It's been limited funding so far. There is more funding coming because of some legislation that passed last year, and there is going to be some bond that comes out in the fall that I believe is at 15 million, Mike?
Yes, the current one is, yes.
Yeah, so that'll be a bond that's coming out that'll help support Connect Maine, and they do 2 things. They do, kind of that upfront feasibility design study, and then they'll follow that. The next step in their process is if you also, that's one step you can apply for, I should say. The next application is actually for the infrastructure build. So you can try to help get a piece of infrastructure built. USDA funding, they just definitely granted some funding in the state of Maine specifically for a few different projects, and so those are getting underway now. I would mention, Mike might hit me, but he can't reach me. The USDA funding that was granted earlier was 25-3 was considered served, and anything that under that was underserved. The latest one that came out, they actually dropped that down to 10/1 was considered served. So that makes it a whole lot different picture, I'll say. And so there's pushback on the USDA to at least go back to 25-3. So if anybody has any connections or influence there, that's going back to 10, defining 10/1 as served is really not applicable in today's age. And 25-3 is probably about as low as we can think about going. So that's, if USDA does come out with additional funding when they're talking about it, it would be good to have, there's a B on that guy's finger, to have to have it at least back up to 25-3. So I'll throw that out there. Northern Border Regional Commission has also funded some projects in Maine. So just trying to find different resource funding, for partners in Maine. Certainly there's been a public-private. We're working with another one right now, similar to some of the ones you just talked about, where it'll be a local private company that wants to step up and try to help the town in some variation. I'm sure bonds will come into play. And then the state participation itself, like with Connect Maine, is how does the state come into play and really try to move broadband efforts forward. And it's, you guys mentioned it, it as well as anybody else, it's return on investment. So I think really what we look at is the big money is going to come from federal, and then how can states complement that? So when you look at, New Hampshire and say you've got a, $600 million issue, right, to solve it all with fiber, whatever it may be. When you think about that, if feds could come through with 50%, right, now you're talking not that it's a reasonable number, but a closer number that you could do. And then with other grants and certainly the state, becomes a little more doable for the Northeast. But that's Maine. I'll let Mike. If you have any questions, but if you want to advance the slide, Henry, Mike can talk about.
Well, I can fill in a little on the main slide. This is some of the uniqueness, I think, of Maine by having an agency, if you will, Connect Maine agency, and that that was created in the legislature, moved around a bit. It ended up under our economic development group, and that really is so helpful to the communities and everyone else. It's two people. It sounds like a great group of people, but it's two with an active board. But it's really helpful. Like in these USDA projects, Connect Maine actually set aside some money because there's some matching funds that you have to come up with. So it helps in that coordination. They have planning grants. There's 2 steps. You have to do a planning grant first, and you've got to qualify for that. And once you get your planning grant, then your next step, you could go in for an infrastructure grant. So it's very helpful. And in New Hampshire, as you know, we have Carol Miller and we have Carol Miller and with her staff, but thank goodness we have Carol Miller. You can go to the next slide.
Real quick though, Mike, there was a question on let me clarify the 10/125.3 that I said. So what has happened is the USDA in the first round of grants said that you were served at 25/3 and underserved at 10/1. The second round that came out said that you were served at 10/1. So that was the difference. The FCC definition is still 25/3, but USDA for some reason chose to go backwards, if you will, on the second round of their funding and said served would be 10/1. And so where people are pushing them to try to go back to no, served is 25/3 for these grants and loans.
In Vermont, if Carol Monroe's done a presentation, you know more about Vermont than I do. No, I lived in Vermont for 30 years. So what we're seeing is a great deal of activity in the town meetings, forming communications union districts. You've got a couple right across the river there. Windham County and Bennington County are both forming union CUDs. Of course, EC Fiber is already there. Northeast Kingdom in Vermont is working on that. Central Vermont, same thing. Vermont has, and you may know this, but they have an agency, if you will. It was put in the hands of the Department of Public Service, again, by an act of legislature. They have some funding. In fact, last year, the legislation passed, they actually funded a position in the Department of Public Service. And Rob Fisher's job is to help towns do just exactly what we're talking about. So it brings a lot of cohesiveness, if you will. You don't have to reinvent the wheel if you have a common point to go to. And Rob is providing that common point. There are still places in Vermont that have chose to go their own route. And there may still be by the time all the CUDs are formed and, well, putting all the towns together and getting everything coordinated, as you folks know, is going to be a challenge. But right now, that is the most activity that we're seeing out of Vermont. From a legislative standpoint, they're still in session. They're still working. They had a couple of hearings last week, one in the Senate, one in the Senate, one in the House, to talk about broadband, get a feel for where things are. and excuse me, and actually how things are holding up and where they're not holding up. A real attention on schools and the lack of kids being able to participate in online programs from their homes. So they're working with us on the survey, but we're trying to coordinate that as well. So we don't want to over survey people, if you will. So if the education department is trying to nail down a particular point, our survey might help launch that, and then we could drill down later. But we're coordinating the survey from a Department of Public Service. Next, Henry, unless there's any questions. I'm sorry, I'm not watching my chat screen, so.
Yeah, Mike and or John, I think there's one question so far from Rebecca Landry from the city of Keene. Do you still have that question, Rebecca?
I do. I just want to point out, and I'm hoping that Jean and Jay are listening, that we're talking about Vermont and we're talking about Maine, and though we haven't talked about Massachusetts yet, these are states that have taken the lead on actually pulling together some of these financing options and working on these loans and these other opportunities, whether it's USDA or anything else, Northern Borders. So we really lack that. Carol Miller, her hands are tied. She is one person in New Hampshire, and I think she tries. But that's nothing like what's going on. I think I saw Brian Fouché was on the call. He's working in Massachusetts because the state is paying him to work in Massachusetts, and he can't serve people in his own backyard because we just are, I guess, maybe relying on 234 towns to find a way to pull it together. But Jean and Jay, we really need you to find a way for New Hampshire to take a leadership role here with these funding opportunities.
Well, I can speak to that. I don't know if Jay's still here, but unless there's federal money, I can't even imagine or doing anything. The state budget revenues, just as towns' revenues, are going to be totally thrown out of whack. There may be strings attached to the $1.3 billion that the feds are providing for relief, and they may not be able to be used for revenue replacement. A lot of what is happening, we're spending over $12 million a week just on unemployment, unfunded, unexpected. And that's not including the federal monies. This is just state monies out of the trust fund. So everything that we've budgeted, the governor's wants to just throw the current budget out the window and start slashing left and right, starting with colleges, I'm afraid. So this is certainly not a time that the state is going to be able to step up with money. That's why I'm suggesting we do everything we can to work with Congressman Custer's office. And what I've been told is that we, of course, have a majority in the House, in the US House. What Senator Shaheen's office said is that they have been having strong pushback from Republicans in the Senate, certain key leadership Republicans. And I think anything we can do to make the swell of requirement for rural broadband so great that this passes all the way through the House and the Senate at the federal level is the only way that we're going to get funding for these projects.
This is Mike Reed again. I couldn't agree more, really. We haven't even seen the impacts this is going to have on the states. Phase 4 of, I don't know if we're calling it stimulus or rescue or what the right word is, but phase 4 of the money out of Congress. That's what we're focused on. We have a meeting this afternoon talking about the bill we're working on. And I think we've been working on this for just about a year. But now, I mean, all of a sudden, the need is just extraordinary. And we have a meeting with our sponsors staff this afternoon on next steps. And then I've been promising Custer's office and Michelle Sheen's office the wording. And as soon as we can, we're enlisting the support of our delegation, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and others to help out with that. So you'll see more from us, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks on trying to get something in that bill. And maybe with Sam has already started, but we have a bill that I think I'll send him after this call, actually. So thank you.
Mike,
is that
did
it
you
on
need-
Vermont?
Yeah, do I need to go forward one slide?
Did you miss New Hampshire?
Nope, it's next one.
Next one.
There we go.
We didn't leave New Hampshire out, honestly, didn't. I figure you probably know more about New Hampshire. We're seeing an interesting thing in New Hampshire. The private public partnerships, certainly, but there are still single communities. There are groups as large as counties, but then there's some towns within those counties that may want to be doing their own. So that's, everyone's learning their way, and whatever is going to work the best. State participation, we've talked about that. Thank goodness we have Carol. You saw most of the legislation that we have is around forming districts, and not a lot of funding. So it's going to be a challenge moving forward. But again, we're putting a lot of our efforts into the federal piece of this. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. I didn't spend a lot of time on Massachusetts. I apologize. We haven't worked in Massachusetts a great deal. I know we're seeing Massachusetts, they had some funding from the state that built a lot of fiber backbone, and that enabled to get connected to that. What we are seeing in Massachusetts right now, Western Mass, is the electric utilities are starting to look seriously. You have one, I think South Hadley's, is it South Hadley, is already up and running. There's another electric down there looking at it. And across the country, we're seeing electric co-ops taking a hard look at that. And some of the funding out there from USDA, RUS is attractive to them. So we have conversations going with electric co-ops. They make very good partners. They have a lot of polls. They have a lot of expertise. And their members, just by nature of being a rural co-op, a lot of them need broadband. So we're very familiar, like in New Hampshire, with Steve Camarino of New Hampshire Electric Co-op. So we're working with him as well. And I think that's it on the state review. We've got some things going. We have a project in it's an island in Rhode Island, and they are building their own network. John can talk about that. But that involved not only the building on the island, you had to get connected to the mainland, and then you had to connect to a location that would allow competitors. Some communities feel very strongly about owning a project and allowing multiple competitors to keep that competition going. Others, like I say, every community is unique. So John, I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. Henry, if you just want to click that like 6 times, I won't spend too much time on this. Just kind of fills it in. And one more, and you have all the arrows. There you go. You got a connected community. We use this in just a, kind of a general presentation mode, just to say, these are all kind of the piece parts that go into it, right? From the beginning, you got to have conversations. What do you want? What's your vision? What's everybody on board? What do those surveys say? What do the structures look like? Planning and design. There's a lot of work that can be done up front, which saves you in the overall RFP process, and that, kind of going down that whole idea of design and engineering and mapping and, really put out a quality RFP so that the respondents are quality. That's one of the keys. So we see that a lot. And just taking you back down through your stuff you already know, financial modeling, that's when you actually have, you got a design and now you actually have some real pricing. So now you can actually try to figure out the funding model of that. And then deliverables, right? You gotta manage it to the end. You gotta negotiate the projects, I should say, and then in the end, you gotta manage it and get it, get a good project management done so that you get the deliverable that was decided upon at the beginning. But that's what that slide's all about. And we can certainly take any questions. I know you're trying to get out of here in 15 minutes, so I am done talking.
Well, thank you for keeping to time. And I'll say, when you were alluding to the fact that we probably already heard this, we probably already know this, we continue to want to learn about other case studies, and
Sure.
There are individuals on this presentation that are very familiar with some parts of this issue and the solutions, but not others. So really appreciate this overview and some specific examples people might want to look into further. I think we are looking to wrap up in a bit, but we do have time for maybe 2 questions to Mike or John. Seeing any.
Well, I'll tell you what, while we're waiting to get one, I just wanted to give an example of some of the variables. We have a client that we're working with now, and their first request to us was to do a full-blown engineering study. And that was to get a price of the project, estimated price of the project. And, there's different ways of doing that may not be as costly as other ways. So, we can do, lots of consultants can do high-level engineering cost studies, or you can do a detailed feet on the ground, look at every pole kind of engineering study. So just be cautious when looking at the steps you want to take. And there's different ways to come at this, but a lot of times it's the semantics. I need an engineering study. To some people, that means they're sending in a crew of engineers. To other people, it means you set up some computer software. So those are things we're learning as we go and talk to the many people that we do.
Thanks. Well, actually, no questions came in so far. So you both did such a great job of explaining it. There weren't any.
Henry, sorry, Henry. I can't raise my hand because I'm a co-host. But I do have a quick question. I was wondering if either Mike or John are aware of any municipally owned and operated networks in New Hampshire. If any exist in the state.
I do not know of one, no.
Okay.
I don't know of one.
I don't know of an active one right now that's built.
And the way you phrase that response, I'm guessing there might be some municipalities that you're aware of that are interested in pursuing that or actively exploring it?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
And again,
I just wanted to say thank you to the group too for listening to us. We appreciate
Thank you. Henry's been very helpful, and you can just email John or I if you have any questions.
Yeah.
We're happy to help anytime. And Henry, I'll keep you posted on this survey. If the more people that can participate, the better. I think we'll all learn from that.
Sorry, Henry, I know I was going to hang up. I was going to be quiet. On the survey, there was a lot of talk about K through 12. I just want to make sure that the survey isn't focused on K through 12. There's a couple of questions in the end that help answer that. It's really, do you have it? Is it adequate? And what applications are you doing, right? So you're working at home, are you trying to do banking? Are you trying to do, post-secondary education? Are you trying to do research? What are the different things? And there's like a list of 10 things you can choose from as to all the different things you're trying to do while you're anchored down in place. So that's really the focus. And at the end, it's a couple of questions that say, oh, by the way, how many K through 12 students and how many college students?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been really, really interesting to see how much data collection happened at the schools just to start to get people set up at their households.
Yeah.
Well, keep us in the loop on that survey. I'll just, thank John and Mike of Mission Broadband once again. What I'll do is when I post the slides on our webpage, I'll include their contact info. If it's not in this slide deck, I'll include the contact info on our webpage so you can find their page or reach out to them via email. So
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and feel free to tune in for the last bit here or sign off.
Thank you, guys.
Actually, I'll take that back. I see a hand up from Alfred. I want to, do you have a quick question, Alfred?
Yeah, I just had a question about
Yeah.
the community districts thing. What is the vision on how that works once something there is implemented for community districts? What's going to be the process to actually do something? Is it like an SB 170 type process or something new?
That could be a longer question to answer. It could be an SB 170 process. Oh, Carol's kind of suggesting she's ready to tackle that. So go ahead, Carol.
So the bill is written in such a way that it leaves lots of options. And so it could be an SB 170 process in which all the towns involved in the district would have to vote on a bond issue. But it also could be taking advantage of federal funds or Northern Border funds or those funds to start the process and then revert to revenue bonds following a successful initial build. And it leaves the districts open to accepting funding from all sources. And so in New Hampshire, it's difficult to say. In other areas, of course, we know that there's additional funding available, but I know that there are some areas in New Hampshire looking at that district, and they're really looking to fund the initial build and then move on to revenue bonds as soon as possible, which is sort of the EC Fiber model from Vermont. But others have talked about whether they think they could get all the towns in the district to approve a bond offering. So it's both. Districts don't have taxing authority, and so that's why the towns individually would need to vote on a bond, just as these towns that have been doing it on a one-on-one basis have been voting on a bond. A bond issue would have to be voted at town meeting.
Okay, because the reason I ask is like in Francistown, we're in a similar situation to somewhat similar to some town like Hancock, where we're like 80% or so covered by Comcast, and then part of the rest is covered by Consolidated, and then there's probably 10 or 15% that are completely underserved, bandwidth-wise.
That is one of the.
So we may not be able to have enough of a bond where it could be split with no tax money by Consolidated to make it worthwhile. But but we may be in a better position for Comcast to extend, but they don't like to do this subscriber fee thing. So we would have to convince the whole town to split up the extra money.
Yeah. So I think that once you have all the numbers aligned, then putting out an RFP will yield those responses, and all of those, including Peterborough, who is also 75% or so covered. There are parts of each one of those towns that need to have broadband, and I'm guessing all the sections that don't have cable, which is very few in some of those towns, and more so, of course, in Peterborough, are my guess is the DSL is primarily unserved, but I don't know that for sure. There may be some VDSL out there, but it's but banding together gets you that critical mass, whereas individually it's not so much. By the way, CCI does like the idea of towns that have some cable, because those would be new customers if they could get them to come over.
Thanks for jumping in on that, Carol.
Sorry.
For answering that question. How about other updates from participants, what your community is working on, what your organization is working on, things you'd like to share with the group? I can say to start out, SWRPC has launched a regional survey of our own. Todd mentioned that. We'll get the word out to folks about where that is available. I know it's up higher in your chat as well. Any hands up? Dana, I see you raising your physical hand. Go ahead.
I did. Thank you. I'm Dana Pinney, and we're working with a group in Fitzwilliam. And we've sent out our request for information, and we've received that information, and we're consolidating it into a served and unserved format that's required. The coronavirus has put us all in the same situation as today's meeting, so we're working remotely and trying to coordinate all of our group's effort to assist the select board in doing this. We're working on our RFPs. The select board inclination is to go alone and not form association with other towns. One thing that we appreciate all the help that we've received from every town, Brad and Chesterfield, John and all the group in Westmoreland, Paul and Bob up in Walpole, Carol and Sturdy in Dublin, and Doug and Harrisville, Tim and Fitzwilliam. Everybody's been great, and it's making our job almost easy compared to what you folks went through, and we really appreciate it. And just one thing that would help us a lot is we know that the addresses for Consolidated and Argent and White Valley, who operate in our town, but we don't have contact information for some other companies that we could broaden our reach, our scope, companies like Comcast or Xfinity and other groups that you might have sent out your request for proposals. So I did post my contact information in the chat, and anything that anybody's willing to do to help would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks for the update, Dana. Looks like Carol, go ahead. Let's try that again.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, so for all of those other towns that are looking to move forward, and if they are at all thinking about a district approach, even though that legislation hasn't been passed yet, if you'd like, I worked with Jean on the legislation and the New Hampshire Municipal Association, as well as we had a lot of input from CCI and others. So if you'd like me to do a session like this for you, if you want to get a group of towns together to just talk about what that would mean and the process of going forward to create a district and the approaches in doing that, I'm certainly willing to help that out. Just let me know.
Thanks for the invitation, Carol. Any other updates folks want to share? And these can always be done in the chat. Well, let's stay in touch. The next item wanted to cover is just as far as next steps, at least on the SWRPC side, we're going to compile kind of a list of points, a basic letter relative to the proposed Senate bills, and circulate that with the group. We're also later this week going to make a recording to this session and the presentation materials available on the Monadnock Broadband Group webpage. As far as the next meeting, we'll try to send out a poll soon. If we follow our past schedule, we'd be looking at early June as kind of a ballpark time frame. And probably we'll want to plan for a remote meeting. So we'll see. So that's it from our end. To wrap things up, had a quick kind of 3-question poll to get your feedback on how this went, and would also invite any closing questions or things in the chat. So you should see something on your screen now. Let us know kind of how this went, and thank you for coming today.